Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming here to talk about prototyping, learning new tech, interactive installations, probably wax poetic a little bit. Probably most of what I'll do is do that. My name is Matt Ross. I'm creative tech lead at Volvox Labs. My disclaimer, I'm just one person with opinions. It does not reflect any official statement of Volvox Labs, but I'm not sure I'm going to get into anything too spicy tonight, but it's always good to have a little disclaimer. So I work at Volvox Labs, which is a new media art studio. We do high quality content, simulation, Houdini rendering, interactive installations, kinetic art, kinetic installations, experiential live concerts. I think within the spirit of framework, we do anything that's a pixel when you really, really push what the definition of a pixel is. So you might even disagree with me that I call some of these things pixels, but you know what? Let's get creative. Everything's a pixel if you want it to be. Let's take a look at the content reel really quick so you can get a little idea of some of the work that we're doing, and I'll probably talk about some of these projects during this talk. To a good understanding that we do a lot of different things from custom digital fabrication to live concert visuals to experiential. We really go across a lot of different disciplines, and we're a team of about 14 strong, and we branch across a bunch of different disciplines. Like I said, my official title is Creative Tech Discipline Lead. I have a background in computer science and software development. I have a master's from NYU ITP. Any ITP people in here? I know at least one. Okay, cool, I'll take it. Beautiful. I teach touch designer and interactive design at Parsons. I'm an average jazz piano player if anyone wants to jam after this. And I'm kind of a weird cat guy. We'll get into that later. Anyway, this is Volvox Labs. This is our team, a lot of talented people, and we'll get into what it looks like working with all these talented people in a little bit. First out, shout out to our studio leadership, Camille Naratil and Michael Schneider. Camille founded Volvox, I think 12 years ago. What's really cool about Volvox is it started as an expression of Camille's thesis project at SVA, turned into sort of a new media art project as him VJing across the country and slowly built its way into a very long-term interactive installation studio. Michael Schneider is our CEO, and he runs basically all studio strategy, business development, and kind of leads us into the future of the things that we're doing. Another shout out is to Ben Forrest, who's here in the audience. It means a lot. Ben, almost all these projects that we're going to talk about, Ben had a very strong hand in and was a big mentor to me and made me the technologist and person I am today. So shout out to lovely guy. So what is a new media art studio? Well, it's a really abstract term. Everyone here is going to have their own definition for that. To me, I just like thinking about it as a studio of people who are repurposing or recontextualizing modern tools of production for art and design. You start with something coming from digital fabrication, take it out of its context, take its controls, and put it into something new, and you have an interactive basketball hoop. You take the typical way that we view content and interact with content, which is that through our phone screen. That's not going to change anytime soon, at least. We take the experience of interacting with content and put that into a projection map room, you are taking the same thing of being a passive viewer of content, but you are changing the medium and you're changing the scale that you are interacting with that content with. We can also change the way that we expect content to work. For a long time, we are expecting to see a screen. A screen is something that's static. It is something that does not evolve. It does not have any generative capabilities. There is a lot of talk and exploration in our studio's practice of media architecture, specifically about building environments, about, there is some sort of structural component to architecture. There is a big screen, but it is supposed to be embodied part of the environment. It is something that when people are walking past it or through or appreciating, they are becoming part of it, and somehow there is some sort of user feedback loop of embodiment. We also want to change our expectations about what architecture can be with a lot of our kinetic work. We really like working with motors, with actuators, and our team bridges a lot of different disciplines. So I think this is a very, very classic Volvox Labs project. This is a couple of years before I joined, and this is a permanent kinetic sculpture that lives in New York. Oh, and yeah, I think I really love this project because it shows all the different disciplines of Volvox Labs. You have digital fabrication, you have 3D content, you have interactive design, and it exists to take what you expect about a space and something that is supposed to be static and gives it a lot of physical motion. I think with new media, we are looking to explore what it means for a person to be in a space, and a lot of our work is trying to challenge the sort of user experience and the feedback cycle of someone interacting with content. So a lot of the times, that sort of like the actual juice of embodiment and all that stuff is a sort of design and technology cycle where we are taking something like a robot arm and we're saying, okay, what if a robot arm is something that can create art? What if a robot arm can have personality? What if there are generative or ways that we can play with the expectation of something as typical as a manufacturing robot arm. This is a project that we have in Mercer Labs. It's a permanent installation, so you can, after framework, you can go check this out. It's at Mercer Labs, a big immersive museum in downtown. This is a big project last year that really helped us like define our approach to robotic art and robots. And I think it is a very good example of this process of exploration and the process of creation, where you have something that is really foreign, really hard to work with. An industrial robot arm is not something that is easy to program. And thankfully, we had Ben Forrest there to read the entire manual of this industrial robot arm and build a lot of backend for this thing. But you are taking on a challenge and you're taking on a lot of friction when you're choosing to work with something that is such a weird medium. And something one of my coworkers, Javier, says a lot is like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Because to get to here, to build something like this is months of R&D, months of work across 3D designers, fabricators, technologists, and it almost like, to see it now, it seems so simple. It's like, it's going through a couple emotions, and this is part of our identity as a studio. We are doing interactive robot pieces, but there was many, many years of iteration and prototype to get to the point of having a touch designer controlled interactive robot arm as a permanent museum piece in New York. I think a lot of these things we explore, as well as like what's really fun about being in new media and being a creative technologist right now is, I think, the accessibility of a lot of things. You don't have to use a PLC or this industrial machining to work with motors, to work with actuators. These are things that you can buy at many different online retailers, get yourself a motor, get an actuator, and start to build yourself up. I'm going to talk about this specific project a little bit more in depth, but generally, I think like this idea of iteration, new media, a lot of it is, you know, I have a motor that moves between 2 points, but because it is so much cheaper and so much easier to work with, you're able to scale things in a much different way. In addition to that, it's not just affordability, it's, things like open source software, it's things like fabrication techniques, and it allows you to build things where you are synchronizing robot arms, digital specialized tool heads, real-time graphics in ways that would be really, really hard a couple of years ago because, there's a lot of individual things that you have to calculate, have to program to manage in order to get like this end effect. And this end effect of the thing you're creating is a robot drawing. But there are so many steps to get to that point. And thankfully in 2025, so many of those hard parts are easier than they've ever been before. And this kind of leads me to the crux of rapid prototyping in terms of how we approach some of our projects. I think one of my favorite parts of my job is as a technologist, it is my job to work with all the different disciplines at Volvox, the AV engineers, the fabricators, the content creators, and basically build software and basically build glue that makes all their things work and lets users actually interact with them. I'm constantly being given new things to play with. We're doing a lot of LED sculptures, we're doing large format screens, we're doing kinetic sculptures, and these are really fun mediums to explore. But on the other side, the new of new media comes with challenges because when you want to do something new, that means that you are starting to build your own tool sets. You have to build your own toolkits. Maybe there is an API on a robot that we can read data off of, but that's all you get. Like you have maybe one part of the pipeline that is available to you, but then it's sort of on you to connect that to everything else that you want to be as part of your pipeline. Things are not plug and play. That is the fun part of it. I'm not sure if it's currently still the motto, but the old motto of Volvox was observe, tinker, and construct. And I think that is a very apt motto for what we do there. I think another challenge comes from working with people who have a different context. And everyone in my team is incredibly talented and no complaints. But period. Period. And it's not a complaint, it's a reality. With a company that's our size, you're working with people who are from different disciplines and different domains. And when I talk about, if I go to a fabricator and talk about time code or I'm talking about APIs, they're going to look at me like, what are you talking about? Just like if they ask me to program something in Grasshopper or, prep something for a CNC, like it's like, there is a difference in a language and this difference in context that exists, but there's enough overlap and enough back and forth that we're able to make really interesting and really fun things because I think over the years, Volvox has gotten really good at putting people who have these different disciplines in a room, basically say, everyone take a little bit of what they're really good at and come together to build something bigger. This is something that we've been prototyping recently, which is, expanding our kind of robotic art practice. Again, it is not the end thing is really important. I think this is just a prototype that we are doing in our studio, and I'm actually pretty happy with how this came out. This is a combination of work from probably around 5 different people because you need that many people to make something small come alive, whether it be a 3D architect to actually program the robot, a technologist to create fluid simulations, someone like me to hook everything up, an AV technologist to actually wire everything to make that work. That's an LED wall, it's a robot, that's the electricity in the studio. And like with I was kind of thinking about like how I was gonna kind of explain this, and there is so with this type of new media art and the style prototyping, there is so much back end work that you have to get done to get you to the point where you can do the thing. And like once you're doing the thing, you're like, okay, what am I going to do? And that's why you need to be really flexible about how you're setting up your systems, how you're approaching some things, because as a as someone making a show control system or someone making visuals or 3D content, I can be really, really flexible and go about that in a lot of ways. But if I'm working with an industrial robot, that it there is not multiple ways to do something. There is one way to do it. There's one way to do the right thing. And that's that. If you want to work in that medium, that is the way you need to approach things. So I think the way that I like to think about things is like, what is the what is the tool that you're building? And how can you build an interface to the really, really hard stuff so that it makes it really fun to actually do that final thing of creating a piece of art or design? I am building an interactive system, and ultimately, with a project like this robot, I'm have all of this stuff on the back end to create one point. And this point is traveling through 3D space. And to get that position of 3D space is a lot of work. So I want to make sure that once I get that thing working, and I'm working with a technologist to actually design what is going to go on that screen, it is really, really easy and really, really flexible for them to do what they need to do. And what's really nice about this iterative process and building prototyping and doing large scale projects and small scale projects is you start to explore, you have a system that is modular and is flexible, and you can say, okay, we have, we've taught a robot to draw, we've taught a robot to move. Let's see what we can do when we're starting to work with other materials. What happens when we change the scale of, like, instead of one big robot, we're going to smaller robots or multiple smaller robots. And, you know, we've gotten through so much of the legwork of the really, really hard stuff. It lets you start to explore the aesthetics and, kind of get to the fun parts. And what I like to think is, like, what are the smallest possible things that you can change to actually have an impact on what you're creating? And then when you're making all these modular changes and all these changes, how do they add up to make something significant? This is a really fun project we did last year for HBO. This was a like an interactive theater piece for the launch of the new Dune show. Any Dune heads in the room? Oh yeah, love to see it. Talk to me later at the bar. This was a experience where you basically walked through a black box room. You had actors all dressed up in the traditional Bene Gesserit garb, and we basically designed a spatial audio experience for them so that all the actors had a secret button, and when they clicked their button, the people who were interacting with the actors would get a series of super secret messages. And this was a really fun, I think working with in immersive theater, working in spatial audio is a really, really fun thing because you are working with actors who think about space and people in a very different way than you do. And it's your job to help them, like, bring people into an experience with technology, not build technology that is going to be cumbersome enough that they're trying to fiddle with it or make things work and it sort of gets in the way of something. So for something like this, we need to spend a lot of time working on AV systems, networking, sensors, and getting everything to the point where, you know, you can just build out this theater piece. You can just build out this interactivity, and you don't have to worry about the rules of everything. Basically, every actor there had a push button, and a push button is a really, really simple interface. There's only, if not the simplest, you can only do one thing, but it's our job as technologists to build all the abstraction for that so that whatever happens with that push button, it's going to be reliable, it's going to work, but it's also going to enable something fun. You want to, like, going back to, is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, if what you're making isn't actually leading to a better experience, then you kind of get into the cycle of the why. That also is an argument for why I build really flexible systems, because it allows you to get to this point where, if you're trying something out and it doesn't work, you can always pivot. This was from a show last year at the Brooklyn Mirage for this techno artist named Nicole Mudaber that we've worked with a lot. And this is kind of coming from a different standpoint with a team that I haven't really talked about. We have a lot of really talented Houdini artists on our team. They are cranking out on our render farm some really, really beautiful photorealistic and stylized 3D content. And basically, for shows like this, they are spending months building a whole narrative for a show, building beautiful graphics, and kind of building this bucket of content that our team uses to VJ with. So we use a combination of Pixera and Touch Designer for these shows. And I kind of think about the interface for this is like there are months of work leading to booting up Pixera and loading the project. That's what I like a lot about Pixera is it's very, very reliable for things like this. But there's a lot of stuff on the back end to get so that you can just plug in that one point. There's a lot of stuff that you need to do so like you're doing justice to the artist, the audience. And I think the people that I care about most are 3D artists because they're working so hard on it and they're so good at what they do. Look at these cool snakes. And their vision and what they're working on, if there's a frame drop, if transitions don't happen at the right time, that is on me. So, and also with that, like a lot of times what I'll do is build out basically a performance toolkit where there is a MIDI controller that has every scene we need, all our options, everything that is possible to basically VJ with. And if I have a mapping that's wrong, if it's too confusing, if you get to a point where, the mapping of a fader to an effect or a cue or something doesn't really work, then, it's kind of like I need to go egoless with the project that I'm building because what I am doing is building a performance toolkit for someone else. Obviously, there's a client involved, but ultimately, the people who are creating the content, that is the fun of live performance and that is the fun of live events is like there is this risk and there is this thing of reacting in real time. And when it all works, like for this show, everything went really, really well. You can have a really, really great end experience. Rapid prototyping also means that you're constantly experimenting and giving yourself the ability to fail and find your problems in your system. I think the Silicon Valley ethos of fail fast has aged in an interesting way. But I think for what we do in art and design is very, very true. Something that I've been annoying my coworkers with lately is a phrase which you never really learn anything when everything goes right. I've learned so much from just burying my head in my hands and wondering why and cursing the sky. But once I make it through that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's easy. I feel like especially on high, like really, really challenging projects and things that you deliver on, you usually remember the day after and being like, ah, that was pretty cool. Like the nights that you spent grueling and like working and redoing something and trying to get something to work, usually you're like, oh yeah, I guess that did happen. I guess maybe in the moment, you have to put all the hours in, you have to get something working perfectly. That does, you're like, I guess I that was part of it, but your memory usually stands at the end of a show or a live event or an installation. You're like, that was really cool. I'm really glad I did that. And with all these things and like ideas about experimenting and working with new technologies, I kind of wanted to get into why Touch Designer is embedded into the DNA of Volvox Labs. I kind of say, like, let's get to the fun part. And for me, coming from a software background where I used to do pure Python backend development, Touch Designer abstracts enough things away that you kind of are able to get things working out of the box to a certain extent. What I like to think also is, you have all these different people, you have all these different owners and people with different um, contexts, point of views, and realistically needs. Everyone in this, these are all people that we interface at Volvox or, in any industry you're going to interface with. And someone giving me, a hour-long video to play is going to have a very different, that they have been, rendering through a weekend, has a very different set of needs than a physical designer who is saying, I need this actuator to work in this specific way, or I need these lights to turn on at this specific time. But we have found over the years that Touch Designer happens to be the best thing to kind of bridge everything together. You know, there are so many things that Touch Designer is good at working with within digital media and live performance. And these are all things that you 100% can do in any number of platforms, languages. Some of these things we used to do in Touch Designer, and maybe now, sometimes we're integrating maybe Pixera or other media servers into our workflows more lately. But we usually always come back to Touch Designer because there is a level of accessibility, fast prototyping, and just fun that exists within this platform, as well as reliability. So I wanted to quickly talk about like all these different people, like what their needs are, and as a technologist, like how do you kind of go about getting them what they need? Also reviewing this, I'm realizing that almost every slide is a question, but maybe that's the end of this. Is we're just gonna end up with more questions, and we're kind of in a the journey is the destination thing. Especially because in this industry and in making art and making design experiences, everything is going to change. And we'll come back here a year later to Framework, and everything's going to be very, very different. So 3D artists and motion designers, they work really, really hard on their content. They want you to be able to play back that reliably. It just needs to work. And they need to be able to change it. That needs to be presented in a way that works and scales reliably. With your physical designers, if you're hooking things up and you say, you're in an active job site, and you say, no, you can't unplug that. Don't unplug that light. It's going to break everything. It's kind of a hard sell because you're working with people that are trying to build a physical thing. You're working with people that are trying to build modular systems. They're working with a lot of peripherals and building like to a certain level of complexity. And it's up to us technologists to build things to a certain quality where, if everything loses power, if we need to rewire everything, if there needs to be some change in how things is getting set up, I can't go back to them and be like, can you just CNC it differently? It's much easier on my side to kind of say, all right, well, I can do some things in the software differently and be flexible in that way. As a software developer, I really, really like Touch Designer because it gives you the flexibility of node-based interface with a really reliable C++ backend and a really fun Python extension system. And like, I like building complex systems in this the most for installations. Like when it comes to having multiple sensors and actuators and all these different things that we're constantly interfacing with, it's just so fast and reliable and, again, fun to be able to interface with a robot or an actuator or DMX winch very quickly. Um, we got some Volvox producers and project managers in the room. They need it to work. It has to work, and it has to be able to change if it needs to be. I can't really, with the people who are organizing the projects and like telling us the way it needs to be, I can't just go to them and be like, well, it just can't do that, you know, even though we told them it would be able to do that. Like, we have to be able to parameterize things and modularize things in a way that makes it flexible and reliable and shippable, because ultimately what we're doing is creating an interactive system that people are going to use. And we don't want to worry about something that's constantly breaking. Sometimes we do have to worry about that, but the goal is, we have to be optimistic about and future thinking when we're actually building things. Same with the end users. When you have a client that finally looks at what you've built, I think especially when I was thinking about those diagrams I showed earlier, whether it just be a button, someone standing in front of a sensor, any of these things, you can build a really, really complicated backend that is doing all sorts of things, any number of monitoring or libraries or integrations, and you can have the most beautiful code base in the world. But, it really comes down to the way that a user is interacting with the system and how what they're looking at or what they're interacting with or what they're playing with makes them feel. And I think that is the thing I like to try and focus on, even though I do love over optimizing things sometimes. And Touch Designer works really well because of all of these user groups and all the things that we're trying to do. It is really fast to iterate and explore and change things and, move towards a system that we want to use. Touch Designer can be used for motion graphics installations. A lot of people get into it from a VJ context, and I think I still talk to people to this day where you kind of say like, developing software in Touch Designer, and they're like, isn't that the Instagram viral blob tracking software? Which it does make some really, really sick blob tracking videos, but it can also be used to build really complex systems, things that are living and breathing and integrate with a lot of things. This is a project that we recently delivered. This is an architectural space in Dallas. Lots of high render content. This is an 8K screen. We have a bunch of LiDARs on here, which are doing live person tracking and basically reacting in real time to people in here. Like, it's not just, I think it's hard to explain also because there is a whole like multi-layer state-based system that allows for like lots of random chance and sort of like generative outcomes in the way that this piece reacts to something. And I think this is something that we're really working on, is how do we approach building an interactive system and an environment in a way where like we can give it its life of its own and we can let it do a lot of fun and interesting things. But this ends up getting to a really, really complicated system. You're building a media server and a CMS, endgame logic, managing a lot of state, a distributed system, sensor processing. I could go on all the complicated back end of this, and maybe that's for another talk. We can get into that. But ultimately, what really matters in this is people appreciating the scale, people appreciating the interactivity, and all of that prototyping and experimentation on the front end, all those months leading up to this, leads to a simple interaction of someone walking up to a screen and getting a giant fish swimming at them, or a giant butterfly, flying by them, and like finding that simplest tiny thing that creates an interesting interaction and building a lot of stuff in the back end that lets us push those sorts of interactions. Let me see. How much time do I have left? 3 minutes. Oh man, I just love asking questions. Let me see. I talked about this a little bit with our motors. Um, Let me talk about this. God, so many projects. I think I will end with this project just because it's one of it's one of my favorite projects, both on a scale to work with, and like I think it just really shows the ethos of Volvox of experimentation, trying to do something different, and kind of especially going into the unknown. We were approached by Prada to basically build out this interactive installation, which was a sculpture that released bubbles into it. And this is something that we went into being like, is this possible? And we had to start from a space of not knowing if this thing is possible to building a whole industrial engineering setup to be able to make bubbles on command and make a playback system that lets you make bubbles on command. Here's some more shots of it. It was up last year for about around a week at a Prada pop up, and it was also up this past year. We did another version of it. Gotta shout out our head of physical design, Zia Zhang, who is also a mad scientist. Within the span of a couple weeks, was able to develop a technique to generate bubbles on command for an installation, and did it without breaking a sweat. Or maybe she was sweating, didn't show us, but she's really, really talented. So that goes to show like to start from nothing and be able to be like, okay, we're gonna start really small and buy a bubble wand and try and blow a bubble from it, and then move up to giant, gallon drums, which are actually producing these things under the covers. So basically, it's a simpler system that you might think. We found an automated way to blow bubbles. Yes, the robots are coming for your bubble blowing jobs. I'm sorry to say, AI is not safe from taking anything away. But you know, this is one of our really, really early prototypes, and I think this was the moment, like this video that I was shooting here, when as a team we are kind of like, this is possible. Like we are actually able to do this and build this into a scalable system. And you've done the really, really hard thing of like, can I make a bubble on command? And then it's up to the fabricators, the coders, the digital designers to basically say, okay, how can we scale this up and how can we make this work as an interactive installation? Um, and I'll just talk about like really quickly why I like Touch Designer for this. And Touch Designer is really great for these sorts of installations because you can have an actuator or an output that is as abstract as I am making a bubble, and you can give time code to it. You can give interactivity to it. I can build an API. I can build an HTTP API to make a bubble for me. Like you have a lot of control and you have a lot of flexibility with working with your sensors, working with outputs and your motors and all these things. So I could probably keep talking, but I know everyone has a lot of time and I'm basically done. So I just wanted to do a quick special thanks. Camille, Michael, Galad, Javier, Ben, the rest of the Volvox team, Law Frank, and Framework. And thank you all for spending your Friday here. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And if you don't mind repeating the question. Yeah, sure. In the back. So you writing your own like modules in Touch Designer to control the robots like from scratch? Are you pulling from a library that's like from the robot like manufacturers themselves?
Or do you have to just kind of figure that out, like make the plane coordinates and all of that stuff, like on your end?
The answer is yes. I think people go about this a lot of different ways and a lot of industrial options out there. But I think the way that we approach it is from a very specific context of who is animating things. And like we have, because we come from a team with really, really talented 3D animators, they're going to be able to animate something way better than I, as graphic design as my passion guy, like is going to ever going to be able to think. So the way that Ben designed a system that we've expanded on, like it is all about giving flexibility in creating complicated movement systems in 3D programs and being able to load that onto the robot and having touch as like a coordinator. And you're basically building a CMS for and playback system for queuing up things one after another. So you can have your designer in Grasshopper or Maya like go to town and design like your amusement ride, a little grace of robot animations. And what Touch is doing is it's doing all that coordination with the industrial robot system. So it's like almost like you're speaking to another media server or an external thing, but there are parts of that that exist. There are like little snippets of things that, I think the thing that really helped us out was finding an open source package that exposed, environment variables and position data off of some of the robots. But you get that small slice, and then it's up to you and your team to build an entire backend out of this. Also, when I say we, this is a lot of the robot stuff. Again, Ben Forrest is the mastermind of all this, so I just benefited from his good software development. Yeah.
Talk about shopping for cheap motors and actuators and sensors. What have you ever been looking for to start telling me that makes sense?
I think my personal opinion on this is to go as cheap as you can until you need to upgrade. Like, because you can go, like, really to just, there's so much you can explore from a, like, thematic and, aesthetic place with something from Amazon or Alibaba. Um, and then, you push it to a point and then you're like, okay, well, I was able to spend 20 bucks on this motor and got accepted into this art show. I don't want to have this break after, but now I have a grant, so I can, upgrade to something from DigiKey or something from Ultramotion and actually have something that's going to be able to pull something of a certain size or be not going to break after, 100 uses. Yeah.
Cool stuff. Thank you for sharing. How do you budget for rapid prototyping? Is that when the client asks you a question and then, or asks, like the Prada, for example, says, can you do this? Do you give them a cost to do budget discovery phase to see if this is going to be viable? Or is that something that is in your operations cost as a studio?
Sorry, I was smiling at our director of production because it was just like,
Because
yeah, yeah,
transparency.
yeah, yeah. No, but
Give away your secrets, but I'm just curious if that's,
now I'm starting to sweat.
Yeah.
No, but I think the answer is it depends. I think sometimes with things that are very experimental, like something that is also not far-fetched because it's been done before, but you know, we're kind of like, I'm sure we can make a bubble, but can we do it reliably and do it over and over again and have it controllable from a show control system? So a lot of times for projects like that or other projects where there's a lot of unknowns, we do have a lot of faith in ourselves, but those are times when there'll be some sort of discovery phase.
You can't keep doing rapid prototyping and then nobody buys it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
You would never, you also have to be in profitable business, right? So.
100%. I mean, that's why we like to balance a lot of internal R&D with the client work. Like, I think there's been a lot of like expansion into kind of we have this kind of traveling art piece called Astral Twin, which is basically all the way in the beginning. I'll find it. But basically, this project came out of a lot of it came out of a lot of client work. And there are so many different utilities and software that we had to develop internally to make working with robots easy and fun, that it got us to the point where, okay, now we have years of robot experience design. Like if we want to make this piece, we actually know, like, to make an art piece, we don't have to go through a discovery phase. We can just be like, what do we think is cool? Like, what is exciting? What is exciting to us, and what do we think would be exciting to other people?
So we've had, one quick, we've had a lot of success, charging the
Yeah.
concept.
It's, I mean, I'm
And
glad,
we should all be charging.
100%, that's sort of the genesis of my question, it's like,
And, you know, it's roughly 10% of the overall.
Yeah,
project.
okay.
You know, give or take how much, like, risk we feel there is.
Right. I mean, there's a point where you've gathered all this information, so it makes really go more rapid, but you have to make some money along the way. Thank you for sharing that.
That's why I bring the product producers in there. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Any other questions?
You may have just answered it with that last one we asked twins, but how often do you find that your prototyping actually creates the rules for your creation as opposed to always having that goal?
That's a really great point. I think we try to do a lot of prototyping both in technology and user experience. You know, we usually do a bunch of pushes through the year to try and like see like what materials we have around, like what things can we explore. I think a really good example of that is this project we did for Infinity, which is sort of this like entire room filled with these motors and these mirrors. Basically, it's mirrors on on these actuators. I have a really corny name for it. I call it Kinetic Kusama. By me. Like, but basically, Volvox has had a history of working with like actuators and motors, and it had been a couple of years since we had done an actuator project like this, and we had some materials at the studio, and we're like, let's kind of prototype this and like see if we can kind of get back into the swing of things. And we put together this really small prototype of a bunch of mirrors on actuators, and that kind of having that prototype, just doing that for an internal event, kind of led us down the path of doing a much larger, you know, custom thing. And it's like, you know, the only thing that really stayed with us from that initial prototype was, you know, what if you are able to synchronize a bunch of mirrors on a motor, but you know, you can take that initial learning of, okay, well, it's actually fun to have these things synchronized and animating at the same time and build that into something much larger.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.